My name is Wesley Chen, and I'm a developer advocate at Google. Thanks for coming to Trailhead and coming to this particular talk. So in this particular session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly walk through what it takes to build applications that integrate Google technologies into your apps. So you guys are here because you guys are Salesforce developers, but maybe some of your customers have data sitting in Gsweet, what was formerly known as Google Apps. What that means is data in Gmail, data in Google Drive, data in Sheets, Slides, Docs, and things like that. So what I'm going to show you in this session is how you can augment those applications, how to enhance them so that you can actually talk to their G Suite accounts to get access to their data so you can build an app that's even more powerful than just with Salesforce data alone. I don't know if we have any time for questions at the end, but if we run out of time, just scan the barcode there or go to the short link and that will take you to a Google Doc that's open to the public where you can ask your questions and then I'll tackle them afterwards. All right, so I have about 38 slides to run in 17 minutes, so we're gonna, put your seatbelts on. We're gonna put it in high gear, okay? All right, so my job is to enable developers everywhere to be successful using G Suite and other Google developer tools and APIs. When I'm not on the road, I'm the host of the G Suite Dev Show, which is basically a set of videos whose whole purpose is to show you guys small little snippets of building on our APIs. I also contribute to the blog, our Twitter account. My background is I've been a software engineer for more than 20 years. I was one of the original engineers that built Yahoo Mail more than 20 years ago. If you've heard of the Python language before, I have like 5 books on it, so I know a little something about Python. And I also do technical training outside of work too, just for fun. Okay, so the main idea is to show developers how to use our APIs. I'm going to demonstrate individual API usage. Whether you choose to run in your environment, which is using our REST APIs, but using whatever your development language is, your stack, your VMs, okay? Or if you want to use our environment, such as Google Apps Script or Google App Maker, where we want to allow non-engineers that have to code to also succeed. Because, sometimes business analysts can't wait for a software engineer. They need to actually write some code themselves. Okay, so we are providing sort of like, an easier entry point to using our APIs. And you can either use, code in JavaScript or our low-code assistive web app platform known as App Maker. And this follows a trend of moving towards more serverless computing paradigms, where you don't have to spin up your own machines. You can just use the services that are provided. Kind of like how Force.com works, right? You write your SaaS apps using that pass, and then Salesforce hosts it for you, or you do the same thing on Heroku. Okay, so the trend is to going serverless. All right, so G Suite, of course, is made up of all these different tools, these productivity tools that you guys are aware of, but under each one, there's actually a developer API. Okay, so my goal in this session is to show you guys how to use them. All right, why G Suite? Well, there's a lot of companies that use G Suite for their office productivity tools. There's also a lot of schools that use it as well. Okay, of course, I think it doesn't hurt that we don't charge for G Suite for education. So, for that reason, I think we have a lot of students and teachers using it. Okay, and if you do want to publish, there's a lot of apps that are out there. They get, you list your app on the G Suite marketplace, and users who are, who own G Suite domains can look for your app and install them for their employees. Okay, and so there's also a count of how many users each of these apps has. It doesn't have to be, it can go from not very many to quite a lot, depending on how successful your application is. Okay, so that's the G Suite marketplace. All right, so the demos I'm going to show is in the Python language. All right, like I said, I know a little something about it, but if you don't do any Python at all, just pretend it's pseudocode, because a lot of people say Python is executable pseudocode anyway, right? But just rest assured knowing that if you develop in Java, JavaScript on the client side, C# with .NET, Objective-C, Swift, PHP, Dart, Go, JavaScript on the server side with Node and Ruby, we also support them too, because these are client libraries that we have that allow you to talk to our APIs. Okay, so you're not just locked into Python. All right, so I'm going to talk about Google Drive first because that's usually at the center of your G Suite universe. That's where all your documents live. It's where the collaboration happens. It's where you share things. And on the right-hand side are, just to kind of like small bullet points from recent releases to kind of show that we're still working on them. There's active steps to add new features, to make improvements, and things like that. So it's not really important to look at what's on the right-hand side, but just to give you an idea of the innovation that we're continuing to add to our product line. All right, so Google Drive. I'm going to show you a very short sample. Okay, so this piece of code, oh, by the way, anytime you see a blue box, that means I've done a video for this sample. So if you completely drop out because you just fell asleep because the lunch was so delicious, then you can dial in at your leisure, okay? So anyway, this application is actually only 4 lines long. Everything else is security, all right? Accessing somebody's files on Google Drive is their personal data. So, you're not going to be able to write an app that can access any user's Google Drive. Okay, in this particular example, we're just going to list the first 100 files and folders in their drive. All right, but that user needs to give your app permission to access their files. Otherwise, that's a big security hole, right? So that's why we have the security code up here. Okay, so the scopes line is just the permissions that you're asking for. And in this particular case, I only want to list the 100 file names and file types. I don't need to look at their data. I don't need to download anything. I don't need to upload anything. So the only permission I really need is read-only permission, and I only want to read the metadata anyway. Okay? You know how you guys, when you install an app, you get the little window that says, oh, this app needs permissions to do this and that. Doesn't that sometimes make you guys feel uncomfortable? Right? Like, why am I giving so many permissions to this app? So now we're on the other side of the wall. We're the developer. So our general best practice is ask for the minimal amount of permissions your app needs in order to function. That way your users feel a little bit more comfortable installing your app, right? Okay, so that's what I mean by the scope. And then a few lines of code of saying, oh, I'm going to read your credentials out. Let's pull them out. Oh, I don't have any credentials, or they're invalid, or they expired. Let's go and create that little box. So when you create a project, a Google API project, you can download the file that has your client secret and your ID, and then the permissions that you're asking for. And this line here called the flow is actually this thing that shows up in that box, the permissions that your app is asking for. And then once you have that box, you want to run this thing and make this box show up to your users. And that's what the next line is for, which is run the flow. First you make the OAuth flow, then you run the OAuth flow. And by the time you pass this, that user better have clicked accept, or else an exception will be thrown and you're not going to get to executing these 4 lines. Okay, so what do these 4 lines do? This one's saying, I want to create an endpoint to the Google Drive API version 3. I'm going to pass in an HTTP web client, and I'm going to sign it with the credentials that I just got. And then I'm going to say, hey, Drive API, list me all the files, execute the command on the API, and then extract out the files that I got back in the JSON payload. And then for every file in files, display the file name and its MIME type. That's pretty easy, right? It's not as hard as you thought. It's just the security code. Once you get the security code down, you basically just cut and paste that in all your apps. And by the way, this is just for a command line app. If you have a web app or an app living in the cloud, you would be doing it in a similar way, but you would be making different calls for the security part. Okay, but once you get the security done, that becomes your boilerplate, and all the new stuff is what shows up at the bottom. So in the remaining examples, I'm not going to show you these lines of code up here. I'm only going to show you the special stuff. All right, so that's how you list the first 100 files in your Drive folder. And when you guys get this working the first time, it's really exciting because you actually see Drive files not in the Drive user interface. Okay, all right, so let's move on to Google Slides. This is a relatively new API. Google didn't think it was important enough early on that people wanted to programmatically create slide decks, but users have told us, hey, you know what? We've got a lot of use cases, and we really think we want an API from you guys. And why? What were some of those reasons? One is because you might have some interesting data in a spreadsheet. You've got data there, you've created charts, but that's not really presentable to your management. What you really want is a slide deck with that information. So what you can do is you can use the Slides API, extract the information out of a sheet, out of a spreadsheet, and then auto-generate a slide deck from it. Okay, so that's one use case. Another one is, let's say you're a salesperson. Okay, why are you here? Why are you using Salesforce, right? To manage accounts, manage leads, and things like that. What if I have a whole database full of customers that I want to go visit? I don't want to have to create a slide deck for every single customer I'm going to visit. What if I want to create just one slide deck template, with variable placeholders for their client name and maybe for their corporate logo, okay? And I just want to auto-generate a custom deck for every single customer, right? This is another use case for the Slides API. If you want to try out the API for the first time, you can try our reference application, which is a converter that allows you to write your entire slide presentation in Markdown and then auto-generate that as a Google slide deck. So you can literally write your entire slide deck in plain text, especially if you're a coder, you know how to write things in plain text editors, right? Okay, so you can try that tool. That's available on GitHub. All right, so here's an example of that. I want to replace the text and images from a template deck. Again, here's a video. All right, so I'm going to replace all the text that has this variable curly title with hello world, and then maybe I have a corporate logo in various boxes on places I want the corporate logo. And so the commands are replace all the text title with hello world, replace all the shapes with the image, the text with this image, and I'm going to pass in the URL for that image, and then I want it centered on the inside of where that box was that had the word logo in it. And then, I did all the security stuff. I created an endpoint to the Slides API, and all I have to do is slides, presentation, batch update, send my request over, send the ID of the presentation. I don't want anything back, execute that, and then it's done. So in your Google Drive, you'll actually have a new slide deck that has those things replaced. Okay. Of course, there may be some code where you're using the Drive API to copy the template first and then modify that copy that you made. Okay. All right. Google Sheets. So before we launched the new version 4 API, there are only certain things you could do with Google Sheets. Like version 3 API and older, you could only create new sheets within spreadsheets, add data to sheets, and of course, read data from sheets. And that was it. Okay, users told us that's not enough. We need to do a lot more than that to sheets. All right, so with the V4 API, you can do all these other things that are in bold now. Okay, new spreadsheets, set frozen rows, formatting, cell validation, change row and column sizes, add formulas, build pivot tables, do charts. Basically, almost everything you can do sitting in front of the Google Sheets user interface, you should be able to do programmatically in an application now using the API. Okay, so why do you want to use the API at all? Well, similar to the slides use case, which is I have a lot of data that's sitting in a database somewhere, okay, and I want it more presentable, or I want to build charts from it. Well, using the Sheets API, I can read all the data or the relevant data that I care about into a sheet and then generate all the tables and stuff. And then on the right-hand side is the other slide, which is the Sheets API, the Slides API, where I auto-generate slide decks. So it's kind of a 3-tier method, right? But you already saw that on the slide, so I don't need to have it on the right-hand wall, okay? The other use case is some companies like to use a spreadsheet as a database, where you have users that are actually typing things into a spreadsheet, but you want to have those things flow back into the database. So you can use the Sheets API to do that too. So this is sort of bi-directional. All right, make sense to everybody? All right, let's take a look at a quick sample. So let's say I have a whole bunch of, I'm a toy manufacturer, and I want to track, shipments of toys to customers and manage the status, but all of that data is sitting in a SQL database somewhere. So the first part of this code is to read out all the data from the SQLite database with these columns, and then I'm going to create a brand new spreadsheet called customer orders, and then I'm going to add all the values starting in cell A1 and add all the rows that I read out. Of course, I'm going to add the names of the columns as the first row so that it shows up at the top of my spreadsheet. Right? And then when I execute this, it's done, right? It just migrated all that data. The data's still in the SQL database, but now I have sort of a sheet that has the equivalent data in it, along with the header row that describes the columns, okay? And then furthermore, maybe I want to change the top row so it's frozen and bolded, okay? So here's another use of the API. Again, there's a video in case you want to kind of like look at this line by line. I could say I want the first row to be frozen so that when I scroll down through all my toy orders, that column header stays there. And then I want it bolded, which is the repeat cell command. So I want to bold the entire first row by setting the text format flag to bold to true. Okay? And then I call the Sheets API. I send it the commands, give it the spreadsheet ID, no return value, and execute, and then it's done. Okay, so this is all it takes to do this too, a one-line call. All right, everybody get it so far? All right, let's move on. Gmail. So why does Gmail have an API? A lot of people ask, well, don't you guys have like SMTP and IMAP and stuff like that? Well, that's great, but those things only work at the message level. Gmail understands a lot more than that, like labels, folders, vacation responder, email signatures, forwarding, and things like that. So those internet protocols don't understand those, and that's why we have an API for Gmail. So in this example, I'm not going to walk through this one line by line, but the main idea is that it reads through all your Gmail threads, it just grabs your threads, and then for every thread, it checks how many messages are in this thread, and then it just displays each thread subject line and how many messages are in that thread. Okay, pretty basic stuff. All right, so that's Gmail. How about Calendar? Why would you use the Calendar API? Let's say you're writing the next generation travel app. Okay, now if they book their travel reservations through your app, once they exit your app and they get the email that says, what their reservation confirmation stuff is, now they have to go into Google Calendar and enter all that stuff in manually, and they have to look up the exact times or whatever. Can't you give your users a better experience by adding those events to their calendar yourself? All right, so that's one of the main reasons why you do that. And of course, if they change their reservation, now that you've created an event in their calendar and have the ID, you can update that in case they change their travel plans. Okay, so here's just a simple example of how to create events in Calendar. All right, start time, end time for a dinner with friends, who your friends are. Okay, and so I'm just going to insert this event into my primary calendar. Send email to my friends to let them know that they get invited to. No return value, execute, then you're done. Okay, so the main idea of showing you these examples is to show they're not that hard. Okay, what else is there? AppScript. We don't have too much time to talk about this, but the main idea is that it's even higher level than using the APIs, where we had to do our own OAuth code. We had to make endpoints to the APIs. With AppScript, everything is built in. For example, here's an address that's in a spreadsheet. What can you do with it with AppScript? Well, you can write a 4-line JavaScript function that touches 3 different Google products. One is that it connects to the current spreadsheet. It gets the address from cell A2, which is the address. It calls Google Maps to say, hey, make me a new map, put a pin on that address. And then 4, it sends an email to my friend to tell them where to meet me for lunch, and in their inbox, they have a link that they can click it, and then they can ask for driving directions and all that kind of stuff. All right, so what's really powerful about AppScript is that you can do this. You can do this with 4 lines of code without having to do OAuth or anything like that. Okay, and then you can take this to expanding that. How can I enhance that? Maybe I want to visit all my customers in Manhattan. I have 4 customers. I can plot them on a map, and I can figure out what's the best order I can visit them in. Or maybe you have a monthly book club or a user group meeting that you want to keep track of. Maybe the location changes. So this is just some ideas of what you would use with the Maps API and spreadsheets and things like that. So have you ever heard of Addons before? AppScript powers Addons. All right, so Addons gives you the ability to extend Google Docs, Sheets, Slides, and Gmail, and Forms. All right, so you can make a slide deck from images. All right, so the code looks something like this. Again, it's similar to the Slides API, but much shorter. If you have expenses, can't you write something where I don't have to exit Gmail to do my expense report? All right, so this is an example of an add-on which lives next to Gmail, and it reads all the information out of the receipts, and you can process everything, even on mobile. And once you're done for each event, you'll have an entire spreadsheet full of your expenses. Okay, and so the code is there. It's pretty simple. And then Hangouts chat. I'm doing a talk specifically on chat at 3:30, so come join me in Meadow. All right, and then other APIs and the rest, and the Gsweet family, admin, classroom vaults. And you can, if you guys use the Google Cloud Platform, you can use their APIs just like our APIs. And just to wrap it up, to get more information, if you want to get started on building our APIs, just go to those code labs. They're a short half-hour long, and you can do line by line some of the examples we had. The Drive API one, were the first 100 files, as well as the Google AppScript one with the address and maps and Gmail. Okay, and then take a look at the videos. And that's all I had. And if you want to reach out, you can reach me on Google+, on Twitter. And if you want to see people actually doing the 2 code labs I had on the previous slide, there's a long YouTube video where I ran through people doing it for 2 hours in India in December. All right? thank you very much for coming, everybody. Appreciate it.